everyone had a good Thanksgiving, and I'm glad to be back to all of you. And you were very much in the front, in my thoughts, this class, and when I was on the front lines 2 weeks ago. And what became most clear, I was at my father's death, was how important an advocate is. Hillary's talked about it, we've talked about it, but I had no idea how much it would take to put hospice in the mix at the hospital. My brother had called hospice, and they'd come and signed an agreement to be shepherding my dad. And then I arrived on a Thursday, and the doctor came in very cheerful at 6:30 and said, "Hello. Well, I'm not sure you're going to be, I think you'll probably be here for a little while longer." And I must have looked really puzzled, and I think that was my face, was huh? And he took me out and had me sit down in the little lobby place, and he said, "Well, you know, your father's been really declining for the last couple of years, and things are beginning to shut down." And I thought, this guy doesn't know that hospice is in the picture. He just couldn't be saying this to me. So I said, "Well, wait a second, stop right there. I just want you to know that my siblings and I and Dad have all agreed for hospice to be involved, and we don't want him to be kept anything comfortable for any extra time. We don't want his life is extended. This is a man who's 95, would have been 96 in January, and had done a great job of getting to 95. So the doctor said, "Oh, well, I didn't know that." So step one is the communication hadn't gone because of busyness or whatever from the hospice folks to the doctor. So he said, "Okay." And he said, "But it's not in the chart." And so I went to the, blah, blah, blah. I won't go through every blow of it. But he said he won't need to have any more labs tomorrow morning. And yes, we will get him home tomorrow. Great. I'm glad. The night nurse helped me a lot because they said, "Well, this is what's happening." And she said, "Well, he has labs scheduled for the morning." And I said, "Please, he doesn't need labs. He doesn't need anything like that at this point." And she said, "Well, I'll take care of it, but I may not be able to get the word to them." So in the morning, at about 6:45, the lab people came in. And "Hello, good morning. We're here to do your lab work." And I'd spent the night in the room, which was nice that I could. And I went, wait, just a minute. And I walked this woman out and said, "My dad's going home today, and he doesn't need to have, if the doctor's order is no more labs." And she was very annoyed at me. Like, I came up here to do this. And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, talk to somebody else, but that's not happening." So then I thought, okay, now we're in order. And the doctor, who I know has cared for my dad for a long time, but he fits all these articles we've been reading about, came in and said, "I have good news, you're going home today." Just like that. "Yep, we'll have you out of here by 11:30. End of conversation. And I could hardly believe, my ears, because Dad was like, "Oh, good." And after the doctor got out, I sat down on my dad's bed and I said, "Dad, this doesn't," I don't know how I said it. As I've told people, I wish I had a tape recorder because it came out okay. But I said, "You're going home because they can't do anything more. They can't fix anything anymore. And you get to go home, to be home where you wanted to be." He said, "Oh." And then he said, he looked at me right in my eyes and said, "That must not have been a very easy job for you." It was so sweet. I said, "Yeah, Dad, but, we've talked about this. This has been a long haul. And then he said, well, it's what your mother would have done. You know, and so we got to leave, but I could not believe that this doctor had not helped that process at all. And then the funny PS on it is when we were home, Dad was in a hospital bed, hospice was on board, and so forth, but that night when we came home, he was lying in the bed, and he was still coherent at that point, and he was saying, I need to exercise. I'm worried that my muscles are going to atrophy. And it was just phenomenal. And I just smiled and said, Dad, you know what? You actually don't have to. I said, all you have to do is be comfortable now. This is really, you know, this is the end of the road, and you don't have to worry about your muscles. And he said, oh, okay. And that was Friday night. It was Monday night that he died just as he wanted, which was to be in his sleep, peacefully in his sleep. And hospice was wonderful. I guess the one other thing I want to say is that I was talking to Bettina today at hospice about my experience. And from the time I got to Rhode Island on Thursday until Sunday afternoon, I was on board. You know, I was making sure things happened, I was making sure things didn't happen, and so forth. And then a hospice nurse came. Somebody had come earlier to do an intake, but the hospice nurse actually came to take care of my dad. And all of a sudden I wasn't in charge, and I fell apart. I went sobbing down to the laundry. I was folding laundry. My sister came in and said, what are you doing? I said, I don't know. I was folding laundry. And I sat down with my sister and the hospice nurse and cried, just cried. And my sister goes, you need support. You're supposed to take care of yourself. It says it on the airplane. And I said, oh my gosh, you know, I had so totally not been in that frame of mind. I wasn't in the picture at that point. And until then, until she took care of my dad, and then I saw suddenly it was Dad. It wasn't somebody I was taking care of. It was my own dad. And then they began to take care of me, and it was great because my family, my husband came down, my friend came from Philadelphia, and my daughter with her brand new baby and her partner came, and they were all there the day Dad died. And it was, I don't think that would have happened without hospice support. I think I still would have somehow stayed on, I'm taking care of this and everything's fine. So, as I said to Bettina today, hospice is just, I'm forever grateful in many different ways for the hospice help. And you need an advocate. You can have your advance directive, and please do, but I tell you, when you're in the thick of it, you need somebody there to speak for you. You know? So, I know you were doing proxies and advocates and all that last time when I wasn't here, but I'm just living proof to say you need them. You just need somebody. And I think the conversation thing is so important because my family had talked, because of what I've been studying and stuff. A year before had said, we need to talk. I want us to talk. And Dad had said, well, you can do whatever. And I said, no, we can't. I don't want to do whatever. I want to know what you want. And I need all of us to be on the same page. And because we were completely on the same page. Even though the hospital wasn't and so forth, we knew what we thought and what Dad wanted. And it happened. But so that's my story.
Do you clap or get a hug? Or Good. So tonight we're also John Seacrest from Quorum, Maybe, Cook, Prodan, Angel, and Seacrest.
I'll clap for that.
and I did that in the right order. So an important thing many of us have asked about, and is the legal aspect of the documents that we're signing, and also The points were made in previous sessions that we live right along a river, and there's New Hampshire on one side, Vermont on the other. There's a lot, and an important hospital 60 miles north, Dartmouth-Hitchcock, is in New Hampshire. Many people look to Dartmouth-Hitchcock as a place, as their tertiary hospital in the event of the need for acute care. So you put all these things together, it's important that we understand the jurisdictional aspects of these documents, and also the limitations that these documents have, where there's some things that they offer, some things they don't. And so we're really pleased that John Seacrest is here tonight to take us through these documents. And so my question, John, is just to get things started. We have both. I think some of the things we want to talk about are the advanced directives, but also talk about the pulsed physicians, life physicians.
Physicians,
orders. That's
order
it.
sustaining life support.
That's
life
right.
Sustaining.
And you know, which we have in Vermont, and they do things a little bit differently in New Hampshire, I think. So nice to have you here, Jim.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. If it's all right, can everybody see me and hear me okay? I thought I'd maybe just keep sitting a little bit and keep it conversational. Lawyers like to drone on, so if you have a question to liven things up, please ask it. I'm not going to do a long presentation. Hillary had asked that I give a short talk and we intersperse as you want with questions, and then you, I guess, go into different groups is the idea?
Yes.
So I just wanted to touch on a few key points. And just very briefly about myself, I practice almost across the street with a group of other lawyers. My practice is almost exclusively estate planning with some real estate. Just because somebody's a lawyer in Brattleboro or elsewhere doesn't mean that they know anything about advanced directives. And one of the things I like about focusing in this area is the ability to really experience a lot of the things that you as volunteers at hospice, and is pretty much everybody a hospice volunteer?
A lot of them.
The real day-to-day experience you have is a lot of issues come up that a lot of attorneys and others don't really deal with. So there's a lot of practical experience that you bring, and that hopefully I bring. I'm also one of maybe 3 or 4 Brattleboro area lawyers who's admitted to practice in New Hampshire as well. So I do mostly Vermont side, but I do follow the New Hampshire side as well and have some clients there. I'm also a member of the Hospital Ethics Committee, and we do have situations arising not infrequently regarding advanced directives, usually around, it's kind of all over the map, but it seems some of the most difficult issues we struggle with are competency issues. Whether or not somebody's done an advanced directive, if they didn't do an advanced directive, and now they're saying they're consenting or seemingly objecting to some procedure or treatment, what's their level of capacity to be able to do that? Whether that's, and a lot of it's not end-of-life stuff, a lot of it's a drug issue or all kinds of different issues that arise. So you see on the ground exactly what you're talking about, which is these documents are important, but what you put on the document often isn't what ends up happening or what results in what you think it will. And the question comes up from time to time, and has come up, what if you have a document that says one thing and you've got an agent who's saying something else? And there's no beautiful answer to that. It's messy. So have you gone on, Hillary filled me in to some extent on what you've been working on. And have you gone over the Ethics Network Advanced Directives?
Yes,
as you go through?
they've all, yeah.
Okay.
They've got a copy, they've been.
So if you
doing their homework.
So if you've been doing your homework, hopefully it won't throw a wrench in it for me to say that I try to avoid, given my choice, using the Ethics Network form. And the reason for that, there's a couple reasons which don't apply to everybody. I would never say it's a bad form, don't use it. I think for the right people in the right circumstances, it's great. One of the issues that I have, I'll often have clients who have filled in that or another form themselves, and they'll say, you don't need to worry about my advance directive, as I'm doing the will or the trust. I've taken care of all of that. And so I'll ask them to bring in a copy. And you would actually be surprised how often it's got a serious defect. I've seen ones that just weren't witnessed at all, or where there was one witness, but the other witness was left blank. I've seen ones where the witness was the agent. I saw one where the agent was a healthcare provider, which you're not allowed to do if it's your healthcare provider. So even the basic technical, here's what the rule you have to follow. I've seen them invalid, and what's difficult about that, like somebody who tries to do their own will, is you think you're all set. And so you're going forward on the assumption that it's fine. Now, as a practical matter, that might not be such a big problem. If the family's all on board and everybody wants to do what's there anyway. But it can be a problem. And so it's worth doing right if you're going to do it. That's one issue I have with it, that a lot of times these aren't supervised, sort of the technicalities of signing. Another issue I've seen is that when people do them themselves and bring them in, there are inconsistent boxes checked, and I'm sure you sort of looked at that and went over it. I'm sorry, would you pile this paper? An example that I've seen, thank you, is this is the short form. Is anybody using the long form, which is like 18 pages or something?
They didn't get it from us.
Okay. One of the issues that comes up, there's a check the box. If I'm unable to breathe on my own, I'm looking on page 6 out of 11, which is sort of the fourth page. If I'm unable to breathe on my own, then there's three choices. I do want the breathing machine without any limit, I want it for a short time, or I don't want it for any length of time. And the same provision for unable to swallow enough food or water. But then, oftentimes people will write in, they'll write something in the instructions that puts that checkbox in doubt. And don't keep me alive if I'm a vegetable. But then they've checked the box, I want to have a breathing machine and feeding tube for a short time to see if I'll get better. If somebody's in a terminal state, and a lot of my clients have checked that because they're trying to hedge. They don't know what will happen. So they'll say, well, yeah, try it, and if I'm not going to get better. But then when they're within days of dying, and it's time to and they start to fail, and then the hospital looks at that and says, well, it says give it to them for a short time to see if they get better. And so my biggest difficulty with the form is so many situations don't fit a neat checkbox, where people are confused about what it means. And it's great that you all have really been focusing on what it means and really getting underneath it. But most people don't do that, and I think some problems result sometimes. So the advanced directive that I'll generally prepare myself is short. It's 2 pages. It's basically a healthcare power of attorney, because I think as I think you all know, the advanced directive consists of the power of attorney for healthcare decisions and the living will, what your wishes are. And legally, I think the most clear and important of those is the healthcare power of attorney. And what I like to do is tell my clients to pick somebody whom they trust absolutely, with whom they've had, hopefully, a few difficult conversations, and not just with them, but with, if that's the spouse, with the other children, even the children who aren't the agents. Engage in the kind of dialogue to some extent that you all are, and then pick that agent and trust that agent to make that right decision for you. Now, the living will piece, there's a short paragraph which is just your standard in my document. It's standard, if I suffer a condition from which there's no reasonable prospect of regaining my ability to act and think for myself, I want only care directed to my comfort and dignity, and I authorize, it doesn't say require, I authorize my agent to decline all treatment, including artificial nutrition and hydration, the primary purpose of which is to prolong my life. And that just makes abundantly clear, here's the person who's the decision maker. They can make any decision. I hope they'll not keep me going if I'm in a terminal condition, and so I authorize them to make even the decision to pull the plug. And then I pretty much leave it at that. And there are definitely pros and cons to this. My mother is redoing her advance directive right now, out of state. And she's been a card-carrying member of the Hemlock Society as a nurse, the Hemlock Society, for decades. And I think whatever cocktails they were giving out, she bought. And she wants to make absolutely clear that she wants it used. And so in her case, she's checking the boxes, but she's also writing in the instructions or attaching to that a lengthy description of sort of her wishes. And there are pros and cons to that. You need to be a little careful. You don't say something that counteracts the form. And that's why sometimes I think the simplest thing is to pick the agent, hopefully, and pick the agent you trust to do the right thing. So I've had some clients not choose a spouse, but choose the toughest, meanest child who never really liked them that much, they say, because they want to make sure that when the time comes, they go the way they want. Every situation is different. I mean, these are tough decisions, and it's so much harder, even in advance, when you're filling out these forms and you don't have any idea what the future holds. So sometimes the broadest flexibility and the trust in your agent, I think, is the best. Here we go. Another factor I'll be honest about, as an attorney charging hourly, originally I started using the Ethics Network form, and I found I was taking an incredibly long time to walk some of my clients through these difficult situations. And then they were getting appalled at the bill. And so partly it was a self-interest of, I can't charge a lot of clients what it takes really to walk them through this as carefully as the situation might require once they really start grappling with some of these issues. So it's sort of a practical reality for me. So talking briefly about New Hampshire. New Hampshire there are a couple of ways in which it's really very different from Vermont with respect to advance directives. One is that in Vermont, you can use any form you want. You can write your own wishes. There's nothing, as long as it's witnessed appropriately under the rules, you can say anything you want. In New Hampshire, you're required to use a form that is, quote, substantially similar to a statutorily prescribed form. And so I have one that I use that's really pretty close. It's a little bit improved, I think, from the form. But they give you the form, and that's pretty much what you have to use. Otherwise, the further you stray from it, the more you run into problems of validity, potentially. Another major difference in New Hampshire, and maybe the most important one, which is to keep in mind if you're going to Dartmouth, is the law in New Hampshire says the hospital must provide artificial nutrition and hydration to a terminally ill patient unless that patient has written an advance directive that specifically, explicitly authorizes the agent to withhold it. That's a big difference. And from my standpoint, that's a problem. Now, we just had a big improvement in that, which is, I've heard of stories of people on that basis from Vermont going over to New Hampshire with a valid Vermont advance directive, and New Hampshire saying, you know what, we can't honor that under the law. I think that's changed as of this past summer when New Hampshire adopted reciprocity for advance directives. But I think if you're spending a lot of time at Dartmouth, I think it's not a bad idea, especially with everybody not yet used to this new change of reciprocity, it's not a bad idea to do a New Hampshire one as well. There's nothing wrong with doing different advanced directives for different states. And if you have a vacation house in Florida that you spend half the time in or something, sometimes that's worth looking into anyway. You want to be really careful that you don't sign two that have conflicting agents or conflicting provisions. But sometimes it's not a bad idea in the right situation. The other difference is, and I don't know if you got into this, in Vermont, the advanced directive can go into effect even if you have complete capacity. I can sign an advanced directive naming my wife as of today. I don't have to be declared incapacitated. And in fact, well, there's a debate among practitioners about whether to, most Vermont lawyers just have it go into effect upon incapacity, but there are times when it might be advantageous to have it go into effect right away. Vermont law says if you still have your own capacity and you have an agent listed, you're basically co-agents and your own views trump your co-agent. So you kind of continue as, it's sort of a semantic distinction in a sense. But one of the issues that comes up sometimes is, mom has good days and bad days. And there are days when she has capacity and days when she really doesn't so much. Capacity is not a bright line test. And so for that reason, sometimes I'll draft advanced directives that go into effect immediately if mom is quite elderly, and especially if there's any question of capacity. What I'll also do, which I think most attorneys don't do, is I'll name a spouse, an elderly spouse, as agent, but I might provide that notwithstanding that person, that spouse, is the agent with final decision-making authority while they have capacity. The actively involved child, I might state in the document that child shall have access to all medical information. Because that way there's no question, if she calls the hospital, that they can talk to her. But you're still, dad is still assured that if it came down to it, it's his decision what happens with mom. Again, every situation is different, but it's something to throw in the mix. And then another difference, and I actually had to look this up before coming here, but my understanding of New Hampshire is that New Hampshire has DNR forms, that I know. I don't think they have a COLST or a POLST form.
That's correct.
Okay.
What is that?
So the do not resuscitate order, DNR, is a doctor's order that you don't get from a lawyer, you get from the doctor. And both Vermont and New Hampshire have that. Vermont has that as part of a broader form called the COLST form, Clinician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And that's different from an advanced directive. It's something you go to your doctor for. And the doctor actually writes it in consultation with you, and it goes into your chart as an order that says, do not resuscitate with respect to CPR, or do not administer artificial nutrition and hydration. With the advanced directive, you can ask them to do that, but this is an order that actually does it, even before you're having a cardiac arrest, or as you're going into the hospital at that point, for somebody who's seriously ill. And the doctor has to go over with it and sign that he's explained it to you. So New Hampshire doesn't have that broader form. They just have the more limited DNR. Yeah.
So in that case, how would you ensure that the same spirit was, I'm talking on behalf of my mother who's in an assisted living in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
So what would, she has her advanced directive,
Mm-hmm.
but you're right, it doesn't have anything clearly about what you've just described. So in meeting with her doctor, how would one convey that order?
Well, one question is to ask the doctor that, in his or her experience, what works best under this circumstance, knowing your mother's wishes. You can certainly discuss a DNR with the physician. And actually in New Hampshire, they have provisions, not just for physicians, but for RVNs, registered nurses and nurse practitioners. And then to underscore again the importance of an advanced directive that gives the agent the ability to tell the doctors, if they've started, the DNR would prevent CPR, hopefully, but if they've started feeding tube or something like that to take them out. For a while, until recently, I haven't heard of this recently, but for a number of years, New Hampshire hospitals were taking the position that even though the advance directive said don't discontinue life support advanced methods, don't administer it. The advance directive says do not give me a feeding tube. New Hampshire was actually hospitals were actually taking the position that, well, that means don't administer it. If it's already happened, you can't undo it. Which I don't think that's the case anymore, but we were actually talking about how to fight that 3 or 4 years ago. So, in some ways it's traditionally been a little nicer over on this side of the river. But I think if you have that conversation with the doctor, if you make clear if there's a DNR wish and it's feasible that that's what you want, and if you make sure that the advance directive is in the chart and that these wishes are documented prominently, I think that's hopefully that'll work. And the human element here is always so difficult because whether it's a doctor, as you were saying, or just staff malfunctions, or frankly sometimes it's an agent who's not willing to do what mom or dad wants. And that's been well documented. I was reading a study the other day about, they quote, there were a series of anecdotes, and some percentage of advance directives are just ignored by somebody, and one of a partner of the person was sort of crying and saying, I know, I'm just doing this for myself, but, and the reality of what happens on the ground, if your advance directive says no excessive measures, no feeding tubes, nothing like that, and your agent, named under the power of attorney, says, well, I know it says that, but mom would have wanted this. The reality is you have a problem. And mom or dad has a problem because the hospital is worried about being sued. The document is not going to sue them. The agent will. Now, fortunately, there are provisions in the Vermont statutes, and I assume there are parallel provisions in New Hampshire, that basically authorizes a hospital to override the wishes of an agent when they are, what's the phrase? When there is a clear, no, when the document is clearly inconsistent, is the legal standard, with the wishes of the agent. Now there's oftentimes just not a lot of clarity in all this. Even if it's clearly inconsistent, the doctor who doesn't want to get sued by those obnoxious lawyers might go to the hospital, and the hospital might say, you know what, we're going to err on the side of safety and get a court order, and that's going to take a week. Because the reality is, if you want a court order here, Bob Pooh, the probate judge, is the one who's going to do it. And he doesn't work on Fridays, and he's really busy. So it's a problem you run into. The advance directive isn't perfect, but at least in theory, if you've got a document that clearly spells out your wishes, at least the hospital, if they want, and 90% of the problems are when the hospital and people want, and the principal want to terminate the care because that was the wishes of the person, and it's a family member who objects. It's almost never the other way around. But at least if they have a clear advance directive, at least the hospital who wants to do the right thing has the legal grounds to do that. Whether or not they do that as quickly and effectively as we would all like, or the principal would like, remains to be seen in a given case. Yeah.
I'm going to just get really concrete for a second.
Yeah.
Living on the corner of 3 states, so, are you really saying that if I'm in a very bad accident on the highway and I'm airlifted to Dartmouth-Hitchcock, or I'm in Massachusetts visiting my family and I'm hurt there and I end up in Mass General, are you saying that a Vermont advance directive really it won't cover me?
No, I'm trying to say that it really, I'm sorry if I'm not clear enough, it will cover you, it will be recognized by most states. New Hampshire was really an outlier, one of the very few states that, until this summer, didn't provide reciprocity.
So, but now they do.
But now they do. I don't know about Massachusetts.
In those situations, we're not going to have, it's not like I'm going to Dartmouth-Hitchcock for ongoing care for
Right.
chronic illness. If I'm there, it's because I landed there by some horrible thing, you
Right,
know?
right.
So, I mean, that's this kind of situation where I would really want them to up to and look at it.
Yeah, and it should be recognized most places.
Okay.
And, you know, an advanced naming the agent, they're really looking for somebody to look to. It would be the real exception. I don't know if any other states don't have reciprocity.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, good question. I'm just
We're
going to...
saying if you're in Florida, you know, if you have I don't have a vacation house in Florida, but if you do, you should have a Florida directive. So that's where I started to.
Well, I didn't say that. I said you can think about it. And, you know, lawyers like to parse words, but
Yeah,
it's
you took the words right out of my mouth.
Yes. It's and part of the reason I'm hedging is that every state is so different with these. I have no idea what Florida law says, and if it turned out that Florida had a draconian provision like New Hampshire had, then you would want to know that.
So the registry says that you get a little sticker, it's on your license,
Yeah.
and that they can, anywhere where you are, they can look it up.
They can look it up, but if their own law prevents them from following some provision, they're not able to act on it.
So I have a question.
Yes.
The Colst, now, it would be my inclination to go get one now. But I'm not sure you can. Do you have to be?
I think you have to be in some sort of a potentially terminal condition. Anybody remember?
Yeah, I think two physicians, I read today either the Vermont or the New Hampshire document, and that two physicians have to concur that it's a terminal illness
To get a Colst?
to get a Colst or a Pulse.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'll clarify that before the end of the evening. I brought the statute with me, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
I just had a question, and this is about family members that might disagree.
Uh-huh.
If you've appointed your agent to employ and enforce your directive, and another family member in the midst of you dying disagrees vehemently, would the hospital then worry about liability? Or if that agent is doing and complementing what you've asked for, is that enough for a hospital to proceed?
That's a great question, and it's hard to answer. Every hospital is going to approach litigation risk a little differently. In my experience, Brattleboro Memorial Hospital is really pretty good. If the agent is clear and the document's clear and the situation's clear, it doesn't matter what another family member says coming in.
Mm-hmm.
But there are definitely some hospitals, some providers who, if they're, you know, they've got a screaming patient, a screaming family member saying, "I'm going to sue you," or "I'm a lawyer and I'm going to sue you, and you know, if you pull that off, I'm suing you for battery, I'm suing you for wrongful death, blah, blah." There are some hospitals that would say, well, wait a second, because from the hospital standpoint, they incur a lot of risk by following this, even though the statute says they shouldn't. But if they're nervous about it, they feel they might.
Yeah.
And they'd feel better going forward with an order from a court. So it can be a problem. You know, again, the document is going to minimize the risk of that. And the situation can risk, and the agent's forcefulness is going to risk that, but it can't eliminate it. Somebody can always threaten to sue for anything. Is this depressing enough yet?
Yeah.
I will say, I mean, I'll be positive. You know, having, most of the time, if you have a valid document and a good agent, I mean, you're the perfect example of that. You know, with your story, and my condolences on your father's death. Most of the time, this really works right. And in my experience, most of the doctors really want for the patient what most of the patients want anyway. But sometimes that's not always true, often. And that's true here locally in my experience, and that's not true in a lot of other places.
You know, John, the Gawande article about doctors having difficulty talking about death, that's what I felt was happening. You know, not that he wasn't on the same page, but to actually say it to this patient he's been caring for. And something interesting, when I was talking to the hospice nurse, she said, doctors are beginning to be put through hospice training. New doctors. So will be a little more capable of doing that.
Well, there's some great new physicians at BMH now who are really good at this. Yeah.
I just had a question about backup. I know someone who was so concerned about wishes not being honored that she had the words "do not resuscitate" tattooed on her chest. And I thought, wow, why not, right? I mean, would it help, especially in an emergent situation like where the EMTs show up and nobody's really looking for paperwork, and they see this when they're about to hit the paddles, I mean, is there like any value to this, or are they going to go the same route and say, forget it, shocker, and worry about getting sued later?
I was talking to a client
What
today.
tattoo?
Yeah. I was talking to a client today. We were doing his and his wife's documents, and he works for an ambulance crew. And there was an elderly man at a parade who keeled over with heart failure. And they got out the paddles and they did this, and the guy woke up screaming, bitter, angry. How dare you do that? Look in my wallet, I've got the do not resuscitate card. It's in my wallet. Wow. They said, well, we don't look at your wallet when you're not breathing,
Yeah.
So I think in New Hampshire they have DNR bans. I don't know if actually you can get those in Vermont. He was of the view that you can't yet, but I don't know if that's true or not. It's tough. I had a client once tape her DNR to her front door of her house. She said, if the ambulances show up, that's where it is. You can imagine what the mailman thinks of that. But there was just no way anybody was going to come in. I'd actually, if people promise not to steal my idea, I was thinking of getting T-shirts made, sort of in the form "Do Not Resuscitate." It's not quite as drastic as the tattoo.
Yeah, I'll do the tattoo. I don't know where.
But it's a potential problem, with the ambulances, because once they do all that, they have their own protocols, and I would like to know that they're looking at this, and I don't know, to be honest.
Well, let me say that our EMT, we know, we had talked about it, and he said it's so hard for them. I mean, everything we're talking about tonight says, do the conversation, talk about it, because he said if he goes to a house and there's somebody who is in an emergency situation, they go on to fix it. I mean, the whole team is like, okay, we need this, and we need this, and we need this. And they start doing what they have to do. And then if somebody goes, comes from the back, from the kitchen, and says, we have one of these, are we supposed to do something with this? He said it's so hard. They actually can't remove stuff, and they can't go forward. And emotionally, it's just horrible, because their whole team has been, I'm saving you, and then all of a sudden they're not supposed to be saving you. So it just feels like the more we can talk about this and make it, put it on the door and let the mailman have a hard time, because if somebody, it's hard for everybody. It's not known. And you talked about having training for EMTs so that they will walk in the door and say, before how can you? It's an emergency, but still. So possibly they can say, just want to check.
Yeah, no, it would be a great thing to ask.
Yeah.
Do they have a do not resuscitate order or not? I'll wrap up because I know that you guys, that everybody wants to break out. I don't know if you all talked about multiple agents. In general, I try to dissuade clients from having more than one agent because it's possible to do co-agents, but if they don't agree, then you might as well not have a document, or you're potentially in court.
Did they talk about contingent agents, or did they
Yeah,
talk about,
yeah.
which is different than a co-agent?
Right, a contingent agent would be, my spouse is my primary agent, my child is my contingent agent, for example, if my spouse is unable or unwilling to act.
Right.
Whereas co-agents would be, these are the two agents. If you don't say, then it's assumed that they're actually successive agents, primary and contingent. But you can name them as co-agents where they both have to agree. Or, I saw 4 kids once named as co-agents.
There's somebody, a parent who couldn't make a decision. Right?
Well, what happens is they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
And so that can be bad.
So if you live or travel in several different locations during the course of a year, Florida, for instance, in the wintertime, perhaps, or in the Southwest, an agent down there where you spend the winter and an agent up here where you spend the summer? What
People
do you
do
call
that
them?
sometimes. Sometimes it's a bunch of balancing because geographic proximity is nice, but it's not critical in most cases. A lot can be done over telephone, or somebody can fly in if it's an end-of-life situation. I've had clients do that, where where it just makes sense because that's the kid who's going to take them to the doctor's office. Or you might, what did I do? One time where it was that situation, they were half the year in Florida, half here. I provided information to both, but only one was the ultimate decision maker. There's a lot of different ways of slicing it. And sometimes it's just, one person is clearly the best. This daughter's a nurse, or this son just has the most common sense and can stand up to doctors. And then that might trump geographic proximity.
But it can't be somebody who's involved in your health care?
They cannot be a provider.
Okay, so that includes people like a homeopath or an acupuncturist or somebody who, maybe not your primary care physician, but somebody else who's in on your care. It can't be that person?
I'd have to look at, I'll look at the statutory definition. I should write this down because I said I'd get back to you.
Because in Colorado, when I had one, my chiropractor was my healthcare proxy. He was somebody I knew well and who knew me well.
Okay.
And I didn't really have I did have a primary care doctor, but I never saw her.
Okay.
So I'm just
I'll read you the definition later. So just wrapping up then, one thing that actually I learned a while ago, a lot of people think there's a statutory order that in Vermont that if you don't have an advance directive, then they'll go to the spouse first, otherwise they'll talk to a child, sort of in order of birth. There's nothing like that. They couldn't agree on that when they were doing these advance directive statute. Well, hospitals have their own policies typically, but it's not Vermont law. So a lot of people don't realize that. Just a couple random thoughts. Did you talk about having it be effective immediately versus springing? I know I talked about that here. Well, I think I covered that a little bit. In New Hampshire, you can only make it springing, meaning only on your incapacity, if certified by a physician, does the agent's power spring into being, whereas in Vermont, we can make it effective immediately.
There, the idea is that there are people who have lucid moments and unlucid moments, and that so an agent is their ability to step in as an agent is that's when one would find that to be effective, when they have capacity and then don't have capacity and then have capacity again.
Yeah, this gets into, it gets into
Is that when you
to
would
some extent.
typically find someone exercising their ability to be an agent when someone has capacity?
Some lawyers think that because for you to be, if the document, as most do, says, my agent shall have this authority if I'm incapacitated, then there needs, a stickler would say, well, there needs to be a physician's written order declaring them incapacitated. But, you might have good and bad days, and it might be a bad day, but the next day is going to be good, and so the doctor's not willing to certify that. But when it comes to making this decision, mom or dad really can't make it effectively, even though nobody's declared her or him incapacitated. So then there's this question of, well, who gets to make that call? So the thinking behind that is make it go into effect immediately. I mean, technically, you're still in the same situation because the law also says that if you name that person, as long as you have the capacity, then you get to make your own decision. So you go around and around with it, and that's why I don't feel strongly about it. Most of my documents typically say goes into effect on my incapacity.
But I
Yeah.
still, so my mother is in the situation that Hillary just described. And because of that, I have been appointed as her power of attorney for financial.
Okay.
Does that mean that it automatically includes health care as well?
No, I'm great you asked that. I was going to mention very briefly at the end, a lot of people have that question. There are two kinds of durable powers of attorney. There's the durable power of attorney for health care, which is contained within this advance directive. And then there's the durable general power of attorney, which is general but only limited to financial assets.
Okay.
And those two documents are critical, and both of those together, I think, are often more important than the will. Because the law says if you don't have a will, well, it goes to your spouse if living, otherwise any living children, and that covers a large percentage of the people. If you don't have a durable power of attorney for financial affairs, which is where the principal designates the agent, a spouse or child or friend or whoever, as their agent to make decisions for them with regard to finances and property. Talk to the bank. A lot of banks won't talk to somebody unless they have that document. Talk to the insurance companies. Do all that kind of work. If you don't have that, the bank is going to say, go get a court order. And then you're in guardianship. And you can, in most instances, avoid a whole expensive, drawn-out guardianship with a simple, good, durable general power of attorney for financial affairs. It's an absolutely essential document for, I would say, for anybody with any kind of assets. And what comes up there is, do you make it springing, where it only goes into effect on my incapacity, or do you have it go into effect immediately?
So my mother had it, she said it was her will that it would go into effect, so I am.
Right away. So we're
But
now-
the doctor would only agree to it based on her mental health analysis, so. I mean, he had to write a letter to set the power of attorney for financial affairs in motion.
Okay, see, I cut out the doctor on that completely, and I just say in 95% of my drafts of my documents, I say, here's my agent, this power is in effect immediately. Now, the agent at that point could theoretically then go to the bank, write a check to himself or herself, and run off to Vegas. The bank will honor it. But as long as you trust your agent, and you shouldn't pick somebody you don't trust, but that's a whole other problem. In many cases, I find the risks of having a loved one have access to your money, which they would get also by being jointly on the checking account or something like that, is lower than the benefits of avoiding a guardianship. The problem you run into with that springing power, here's my agent, and if I'm declared incapacitated, then my agent can act. One problem you have is, again, mom and dad has good and bad days. And so a physician might not be willing to declare that they're incapacitated, but everybody knows mom needs help, the kid needs to talk to the bank, there's all that. And so you run into that problem.
So I should consult with my mother's doctor about if he thinks it would be a good time to also spring the health.
Yeah, have you ever used it? The agent?
health?
Well, not the health, or I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm using
He
the
did it
power
already
of
on
attorney
top.
for finances all the time,
Okay,
every
yeah.
day. Yeah, I
Yeah.
do all of her bills, I do everything,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's in action, but my question was just, I guess it's a separate activity to get the health one.
Yeah, and that's in New
Started.
Hampshire?
Yeah, this is all.
Yeah, I don't know how the doctor would approach that. I mean,
But that's the way to go, is to ask him.
yeah, I mean,
It's through him.
can your mother still make decisions?
At times, it's just like Hillary said, certain days, yes, other days, no.
Yeah. I don't know how that works from a chart standpoint, if you have days that are good and days that are bad. Let me just, I probably need to wrap up. Okay, last couple things. If anybody has children or grandchildren who are college age, people never think about this, and I don't know if you talked about this, but when they're adults, the parents no longer have any legal right to have any access to their information. So I'll advise clients with college-age kids to name the parent on an advance directive.
And to have one.
And to have one. And because I've had clients have their children go to the hospital from a football concussion, and it's like pulling teeth to try to get somebody to talk to them and tell them what's going on. My last comment is just, especially if you have, if you're talking to families, or it's your own family, I would encourage you, especially if you're advising people who are in hospice or contemplating hospice, to go see a decent lawyer about their estate plan. I don't know if that's part of your sort of regular protocol, but a lot of these issues really, if they're not dealt with early on, they can be real problems. And there are some real nuances to estate planning, and a huge area that that I do a lot of work and that very few attorneys in Vermont deal with is Medicaid planning. Long-term care, I guess if you're going into hospice, you may or may not ever need long-term care Medicaid, but the other spouse might. And there are things we can do in Vermont to protect assets for the other surviving spouse and for the children, that you can't do in most other states, you can't do in New Hampshire, and that are really, tremendously important, and for your ability for everybody to be able to keep and use and hopefully pass on assets that they've saved up their whole life the hard way. So thank you very much for my diatribe here.
No, that was all good info.
So here's the cafe question. Let's see how we can do this. We're going to have a short cafe. If you've completed your directive, you have a completed directive, if you could say what worked well for you, this is at your cafe table, what was helpful. And if you haven't completed the directive, talk about what you need next as far as what will get you closer to having it complete. Okay?
Challenging gets to the issue I mentioned at some point earlier about what happens if on my drive home tonight I swerve off the road and hit a tree.
Well, I made mine out, and I wasn't sure about the agent, because I'm married to a man who I feel will want to do everything to just keep me alive, and I don't want to.
I'm trying to make it easier, and I talked with my agent quite a bit. We've talked before, but because of this class, I sat down and said,
I'd be the one that would be able to, I think, say, no, that's it, pull the plug. But he's also very quiet.
one thing I really want to do with a form, and I think having the detail helps to do, is minimize how many decisions that person has to make when they're in an emotional situation too.
I want to have a tattoo that says heart here, pump. Pump here.
The agent's not going to know.
Well, I just mean a month from now, once this is actually legal.
I mean, if I have a stroke, am I going to want a breathing tube until they see if I come back?
It'd be nice to be 95 and in my sleep, but I don't have any reason to expect that's how it's going to go.
Well, and I was looking at this not just from the standpoint of a terminal illness, but what about a sudden accident?
Who's on the list want to know they're on the
I mean,
list.
if you have a stroke, it seems like...
What do pet owners put on the outside of their front door?
But she has hospice volunteers that go back and forth.
Pet inside.
Pet inside, how many cats and dogs?
Yeah.
Maybe you put up something on your front door that says, my advanced directive is on the fridge door.
Fall to me some time to think about this.
I'm not so sure if he shares my views. Have a